At 88 years old, Morgan Freeman is one of the most respected voices in Hollywood. Calm, wise, and unshakable. But behind that voice the world admires lies a story almost no one truly understands. People see the dignity, the strength, the grandfather-like grace, but few know how much pain he carries behind that quiet smile, or how many nights he spent alone, replaying memories he never speaks about publicly. The world sees an icon, a legend, a symbol of calm in a chaotic world. But what they don't see is the heartbreak that followed him from childhood into old age. A lifetime of battles fought in silence. Moments when fame couldn't shield him from loss. Moments when success felt heavy, not triumphant. Moments when the man with the warmest voice on earth struggled to find peace within himself. Why does someone so loved, so admired, so celebrated, still speak with a sadness only heard between his lines? Why do those closest to him say that behind the wisdom, behind the calm, behind the voice that shaped generations, lies a story even more dramatic than the characters he's played? At 88, Morgan Freeman finally stands at a point in life where the spotlight can no longer hide the truth. The truth about the difficult beginnings he fought his way out of. The truth about the sacrifices he made to become who he is. The truth about the losses that nearly broke him. And the truth about the quiet, private heartbreak that still follows him today. This is the story the world never heard. The life beyond the spotlight, the hidden battles, the unseen scars, and the heartbreak that shaped one of Hollywood's greatest legends. And what happened in the moment his life changed forever is something no one was prepared for. To the world, Morgan Freeman has always appeared unshakable. A man carved from calm stone, speaking with the voice of a sage who has lived 1,000 lives. His public image is almost mythic, dignified, patient, endlessly wise. When people hear his voice, they feel comfort. When they see his face, they see stability. When he walks into a room, even in silence, it feels as if a story is about to be told. For decades, Hollywood framed him as the embodiment of serenity, the wise mentor, the trusted guide, the moral compass in the films that shaped generations. From prisoners searching for hope, to detectives chasing monsters, to presidents facing impossible decisions, he played the man who always knew the answer. The man who always had control. The man who never broke. And because of that, people assumed his real life was just as steady. Fans believed he carried no fear, no chaos, no regret. That he walked through life untouched by the storms that battered everyone else. They imagined him as a man who never raised his voice in anger, never lost his way, never crumbled under pressure. They believed the characters he played were simply reflections of the person he truly was. But the public image came at a cost. The calm he showed to the world became a mask the world expected him to keep wearing. Even when the cameras were off, even when life turned heavy, even when loss began to shadow his steps. People didn't allow Morgan Freeman to be human. They didn't allow him flaws, weakness, or moments of breaking. They needed him to be the steady voice, the wise one, the symbol of clarity. And with every new role that placed him at the center of strength, the gap between who he appeared to be and who he truly was grew wider. His fame became bigger than his own identity. Journalists wrote about his composure as if it were unshakable, a permanent feature rather than a practiced discipline. Fans approached him expecting warmth and guidance. Directors hired him expecting him to carry the emotional weight of entire stories with a single look. The world saw a man who had everything under control. But they didn't see the weight he carried behind closed doors. They didn't see the exhaustion in his eyes when the interviews ended. They didn't see how fame demanded stillness he sometimes couldn't maintain. They didn't see the loneliness that crept into his voice during the long nights when memories resurfaced. Memories he never told reporters. Memories he never felt safe enough to share. And as he grew older, the spotlight that once celebrated him began to feel colder. At 88, the public still sees the legend, the voice, the symbol of wisdom. But what they don't see are the fractures in the foundation. The toll decades of expectations took on his heart, the private heartbreaks that shaped him into the quiet, reflective man he is today. Morgan Freeman's public image is iconic, but behind that image lies a story far more fragile and far more human than anyone imagined. Behind the calm voice and composed presence the world admires, Morgan Freeman carries a private world that almost no one has access to. The hidden self he keeps tucked away from cameras, interviews, and red carpets is quieter, more fragile, and filled with memories that shaped him long before fame ever found him. People often mistake his silence for peace, but silence in Morgan's life has always been something different. Something earned through struggle, not gifted by circumstance. When the lights fade and the applause disappears, he retreats into a stillness that feels nothing like the characters he plays. It is a stillness born from reflection, from loss, from long nights spent confronting memories he never asked to revisit. He is a man who learned early that showing pain makes you vulnerable. And vulnerability, for him, was something the world didn't seem to want from him. So he built walls, not the kind meant to keep people out, but the kind meant to protect what was left of his heart. Behind those walls lives a man who has fought battles quietly, who has carried burdens alone, who has navigated heartbreak with dignity, because he never quite learned how to ask for help. In private, Morgan Freeman is far less confident than the world believes. There are moments when doubt creeps in, moments when he questions the choices he made, the relationships he lost, and the sacrifices required to survive the industry that both elevated him and isolated him. He often replays conversations from years ago, wondering if he could have said more or less, wondering if he could have held on to certain people tighter, wondering if life would have been gentler had he followed a different path. Those who know him closely describe him not as the wise, unshakable mentor he appears to be, but as a man who often retreats into deep thought, sitting alone for hours, drifting between gratitude and grief. He does not cry easily, but he feels deeply. He does not raise his voice, but his silence speaks even louder. His hidden self carries scars, some healed, some still tender, that shape the way he walks through the world. He is haunted at times by the long stretches of loneliness fame brought into his life, by the strained connections, the broken relationships, the quiet moments in hotel rooms where applause couldn't reach him. The image of the mentor becomes a heavy cloak when he himself is searching for guidance, searching for meaning, searching for a place where he can simply be him without the expectations attached. And still, he rarely lets this side of himself show, not because he is hiding something shameful, but because he has lived long, enough to understand that vulnerability can be misunderstood. He protects his hidden self because it holds the pieces of his life that matter most, the wounds, the regrets, the private truths that keep him grounded. At 88, Morgan Freeman carries a lifetime of silent battles in his eyes. The world sees confidence, but behind it lives a man shaped by storms no one ever saw, holding on to strength he had to build from the inside out. Long before Morgan Freeman became the voice the world leaned on, he was a quiet boy, born into a world that offered him very little comfort. His story begins far from Hollywood, far from sets, cameras, or red carpets. It begins in the Deep South, in a time when life was harsh, choices were limited, and dreams felt almost impossible for a child like him to hold on to. He was born into poverty, into a family that survived from week to week, never knowing if tomorrow would be easier or harder. His childhood was not defined by security, but by movement. His family moved countless times, drifting from one town to another, chasing work, stability, and hope wherever they could find it. And with every move, Morgan learned one thing: nothing in life stays still for long. He grew up surrounded by noise he couldn't escape. Arguments drifting through thin walls, the stress of adults trying to make ends meet, the heavy silence that followed disappointment. But even in the chaos, there were moments when the world felt gentle. Moments when he escaped into stories, slipping between pages or losing himself in old films on tiny screens. Those stories became his refuge, the one place where he wasn't just a kid caught between broken systems and limited opportunities. Yet, the world didn't make room for boys like him to dream. Teachers rarely encouraged him. Society rarely expected much from him, and poverty became a shadow that followed him through every year of his early life. He learned early how to be resilient, how to stay quiet, how to listen more than he spoke, how to survive without asking for anything. There were days when he felt invisible, days when the world seemed too large for a boy with nothing but imagination to cling to. But even then, something inside him refused to break. Something in his spirit held on, whispering that one day life could be different, even if he didn't know how, when, or where that change would come. He faced moments of early heartbreak, too. The kind children aren't supposed to understand, but often do far too well. Broken promises, financial struggles, the feeling of being powerless in a world too big for him. These moments carved into him a quiet strength, a slow-burning determination, and a deep understanding of pain that later made his performances feel so human. And yet, even in the midst of hardship, he found small sparks of hope. A teacher who noticed his voice, a school play where he felt alive for the first time, a moment when applause, just a little, made him realize he could be seen. He didn't know it then, but those small sparks would shape the path ahead. They would become the foundation of something far greater than anyone around him imagined. The poverty, the movement, the instability, they didn't crush him, they forged him. From these humble, difficult origins emerged a boy who learned to endure, to adapt, and to find strength in silence. A boy who would one day grow into a man whose voice carried the echoes of everything he survived. At 88, when Morgan Freeman reflects on where he came from, he doesn't speak of bitterness. He speaks of truth. Because without those origins, without the struggle, the pain, the instability, he would never have become the legend the world knows today. The moment that would change Morgan Freeman's life forever didn't arrive with fanfare, applause, or grand expectations. It arrived quietly, like most defining moments do, hidden inside an ordinary day that seemed no different from any other. He was still just a young boy then, living in a world that felt small, heavy, and unforgiving. A world where dreams were luxuries no one around him could afford to take seriously. But something inside him shifted the first time he stepped onto a small stage at school. It wasn't a glamorous stage. The lights were dim, the audience small, the performance simple. Yet, when Morgan stood there, something new awakened inside him. He felt seen, not as a child struggling to survive, not as a boy who moved from place to place with uncertainty, but as someone who had something to offer, something only he could give. The spark didn't come from applause. It came from the way performing made him feel free. For the first time, he wasn't carrying the weight of poverty or instability. He wasn't navigating loud arguments or quiet disappointments. On that stage, he stepped out of his life and into possibilities he had never imagined. His voice, which had always been soft, cautious, almost apologetic, suddenly felt powerful, controlled, important. He didn't know it then, but that moment planted the seed for a future that would carry him far from the world he knew. As a teenager, that spark grew. He began performing more. School plays, small productions, anything that allowed him to slip into the world of characters much larger than himself. His teachers noticed how naturally he could command attention without raising his voice. How he could make a room fall silent with nothing but a look. How his presence, even at that age, carried a truth and weight that couldn't be taught. Still, he doubted himself. The world he grew up in had trained him to expect limitations, not possibilities. When opportunities appeared, he questioned whether he deserved them, whether a boy from his background could truly believe in dreams as bold as acting. But that spark inside him, quiet, persistent, unshakable, kept pulling him toward the stage. There were moments when he tried to ignore it, when he considered choosing a safer path, a predictable life, something practical. But every time he tried to walk away, something always brought him back. His voice, his presence, his ability to channel emotion in a way that felt real, raw, and deeply human. Acting wasn't just something he enjoyed, it was something that felt like destiny. And destiny has a way of refusing to be ignored. One day, he received a piece of advice that would shape his journey. If something keeps calling you, boy, you better listen. He did, and that spark turned into a flame. Morgan Freeman didn't chase fame. He chased purpose, something meaningful, something true, something that made him feel alive in a world that had often tried to quiet him. The spark that began on a small school stage would eventually ignite a career that touched millions. But in those early moments, he only knew one thing. For the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged somewhere, like he had a voice worth hearing. And that feeling, simple, powerful, undeniable, would carry him forward into a future neither he nor the world could yet imagine. Morgan Freeman's breakthrough didn't arrive quickly. It didn't sweep in with sudden fame or overnight success. Instead, it crept into his life slowly, through years of struggle, rejection, and quiet persistence. By the time the world finally noticed him, Morgan had already lived an entire lifetime of waiting, an entire lifetime of wondering whether his spark would ever become something real. In his early adulthood, he pursued acting with the same steady determination he had learned as a child. But the industry he stepped into wasn't built to make space for someone like him. Not easily, not willingly, and certainly not quickly. Roles were limited. Doors were closed before they even opened. And every audition felt like a battle he had to fight alone. For years, he worked small jobs to survive. Janitor, clerk, anything that kept him afloat while he held on to the fragile hope that one day his chance would come. He lived in tiny apartments with peeling paint and thin walls, each new place feeling temporary, just like the life he was trying to escape. Nights were long, days were uncertain, and every setback chipped away at the belief that he could ever become what he dreamed. But still, he didn't stop. There were moments of almost giving up. Moments when he wondered if his spark had deceived him, if he had misread the signs, if the stage had called him only to lead him into disappointment. But something deep inside, something forged during childhood hardship, kept him going. He pushed through exhaustion, through doubt, through loneliness. He kept taking classes he couldn't afford, kept auditioning for roles that barely paid, kept believing that somewhere, somehow, someone would finally see him. Then came the first shift. It wasn't fame. It wasn't a starring role. It was a small part on a children's TV show, The Electric Company. A job that seemed simple from the outside, but for Morgan, it was everything. It was stability, It was validation. It was the first time he had a consistent paycheck doing what he loved. It allowed him to breathe, just a little, to imagine something bigger, just a little. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And with that small opportunity came something even more important: exposure. For the first time, people across the country saw his face. Children recognized his voice. Producers noticed the quiet power he brought to even the simplest lines. And though it wasn't the breakthrough he hoped for, it was the foundation he desperately needed. But Morgan Freeman was not built for small roles alone. His talent was too deep, too human, too honest. And soon, directors began to see what he could offer. Then came the moment that cracked the door open: his performance in Street Smart. It was raw. It was unsettling. It was unforgettable. The world saw something they had never seen before: a man capable of carrying emotion with devastating authenticity. His character wasn't glamorous. It wasn't gentle, but it was alive. And Morgan brought a truth to the screen that critics could not ignore. Suddenly, the man who had spent decades waiting found himself nominated for an Academy Award. That nomination didn't just change his career. It proved he belonged. It proved that every small part, every rejection, every long night had been building towards something greater. It proved that his quiet persistence mattered. From that moment on, Hollywood no longer saw him as an unknown actor fighting for scraps. They saw a force, a presence, a storyteller with the ability to make audiences feel something real. His roles grew. His opportunities expanded. And before long, Morgan Freeman became one of the most respected actors of his generation. Not because he embraced fame, but because he embraced truth. Every performance came from the deepest parts of his life: the pain, the loneliness, the strength he built from nothing. His breakthrough wasn't sudden. It was earned. It was the victory of a man who refused to surrender to circumstance. The victory of a boy who once read stories to escape his life, now becoming the voice of stories that shaped the world. And yet, even as his star rose, the price of success, the cost few ever see, was waiting just ahead. Success arrived in Morgan Freeman's life, not like a storm, but like a slow sunrise, quiet, steady, and impossible to ignore. By the time he reached the peak of his career, he had become something more than an actor. He had become a symbol, a presence, a voice the world trusted, admired, and turned to in moments when stories needed gravity, guidance, or truth. Hollywood finally understood what he had always carried within him, and once they saw it, they couldn't unsee it. His roles began to expand into something larger than performance. Directors built entire emotional arcs around his presence. Producers sought him out not just for star power, but for soul. Audiences felt his characters long after the credits rolled. And critics, once hesitant, now spoke of him with respect reserved for the rarest talents. Then came Driving Miss Daisy, the performance that transformed him from a respected actor into a global icon. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It wasn't built on spectacle. It was built on depth, careful, subtle, human depth, the kind only Morgan Freeman could deliver. The world fell in love with the man who could break your heart with a single expression, a single line, a single quiet moment. And with that role, the crown placed itself on his head. He became the face of wisdom, the embodiment of dignity, the storyteller whose very presence elevated a film from entertainment to art. When Hollywood needed truth, they called him. When they needed weight, they called him. When they needed a character the audience would believe without question, they called him. Then came The Shawshank Redemption, a film that would one day stand among the greatest ever made. But its heart, its emotional core, beat inside Morgan Freeman's narration. His quiet strength carried the story. His humanity made it unforgettable. What the world didn't know was that the empathy in his voice came from lived experience. Decades of waiting, struggling, fighting to be seen. Audiences felt his soul in that performance because he had poured every part of it onto the screen. And after that, the crown was no longer metaphorical. He became the voice. Documentaries, films, commercials, narrations that shaped the childhoods and memories of millions. People said he sounded like truth itself, calm, steady, eternal. But behind that voice was a man who had once wondered if he would ever be heard at all. His fame reached heights he never imagined. Red carpets, prestigious awards, roles alongside the biggest names in Hollywood. Directors treated him like royalty. Younger actors looked at him with reverence. Audiences felt as if they knew him, even though he shared so little of himself with the world who he'd. The crown fit him, but it was heavy. With every new achievement, every new performance, the expectations grew. People saw him as perfect, unbreakable, endlessly wise. They forgot he was human. They forgot he was aging. They forgot he carried wounds deep beneath the surface. Success had lifted him far above the world he once knew. But at the same time, it placed him on an island, one where he often stood alone, where the applause felt distant, where the admiration felt hollow, where his own heart struggled to keep up with the image the world had built around him. The crown of greatness is beautiful from a distance, but up close, it presses down, quietly, relentlessly. And for Morgan Freeman, the price of becoming a legend would reveal itself in ways he never expected. Success, for Morgan Freeman, did not arrive quietly, nor did the price that came with it. The world saw the awards, the applause, the reverence. They saw the man standing tall, composed, dignified. But the parts they never saw, the parts hidden beneath years of discipline and silence, were the years when success carried a cost far heavier than anything he had endured on his way up. Fame brought blessings, yes, but it also brought expectations that were nearly impossible for any human being to shoulder. And Morgan, who had built a life on surviving hardship in silence, found himself wrestling with something new. The weight of being everyone's symbol of strength, even when he himself felt weaker than he had ever dared to admit. It began slowly. As his fame grew, the world also grew louder around him. People recognized him everywhere. Restaurants, airports, quiet streets meant for peace. They expected something from him every time. A warm smile, a wise word, a calm presence. He gave it to them, not because he had to, but because he had built a persona rooted in kindness and patience. But what the world never understood was how exhausting it became to always be the one others leaned on. He was a man who had once struggled to be seen. Now he struggled to disappear. At the height of his success, Morgan found himself surrounded by people but often deeply alone. Conversations felt different. Trust became a fragile thing. He could sense when someone approached him out of admiration, and when they approached him because they wanted something. Money, opportunity, proximity to fame. His circle grew smaller, much smaller. And those who had once been closest began to feel distant. Not because they changed, but because he had. He began to live in two worlds, the world the public saw, and the world he retreated into when the cameras stopped rolling. The price of fame revealed itself in the relationships he lost. Friendships that couldn't survive the distance. Love that grew strained under scrutiny. Family moments missed because Hollywood demanded more and more of his time. He tried to balance it all. He tried to remain grounded. But success, even when earned slowly, can erode the parts of a man he thought were indestructible. Then came the grief, the kind that changes a person, the kind that leaves a permanent shadow. Morgan Freeman endured personal losses that never made headlines. Silent heartbreaks. Moments when he stood in empty rooms, holding memories that felt heavier than any award he had ever lifted. He carried the loss of relationships he couldn't repair, the loss of time he could never reclaim, and later in life, the devastating loss that reshaped every part of him. The tragic passing of someone he loved deeply, painfully, permanently. The world saw the news. They offered condolences, wrote articles, shared photos. But they didn't see him alone in the quiet hours afterward, replaying moments he wished he could return to. They didn't see the guilt he carried, guilt that didn't belong to him, but attached itself anyway. They didn't see the nights he stayed awake because sleep brought memories he wasn't ready to face. He continued working, not because he wanted to escape grief, but because work gave him a rhythm, something steady, something predictable. But even on set, he felt the heaviness in his chest. He delivered performances that moved audiences to tears, while he himself was trying to hold his own life together. Then came something no one expected. The accident. One moment changed everything. A quiet drive turned into a life-altering crash. The world learned about it from headlines. Morgan lived it in pain, physical pain that stayed with him for years, and emotional pain that lingered even longer. He survived the crash, but he didn't walk away unchanged. His left hand was severely injured. His mobility was affected. He struggled with chronic pain. Tasks that were once simple became battles. He fought daily, quietly, without complaint. The public assumed he healed quickly because he returned to work. But they didn't see the careful movements, the discomfort, the adjustments he made to hide the limitations he now carried. He didn't want sympathy. He didn't want to be pitied. He wanted dignity. And so he carried the pain alone, getting through scenes with a calmness that amazed even his colleagues, never knowing how much effort it took him to lift a hand, walk across a room, or maintain composure during long hours of filming. The price of success deepened with age. As he moved into his 70s and 80s, Morgan felt the world change around him. Roles became fewer. His energy changed. Fame felt different. Not dazzling, but distant. The applause he once worked so hard to earn grew quieter, and he found himself sitting alone more often than he would admit, wondering how much of his life he had given away to an industry that never gave time back. But perhaps the heaviest price of all was identity. He became trapped inside the image the world created for him. The wise man, the mentor, the calm guide, the voice of reason. People forgot that he was human, that he had doubts, fears, regrets, that he had made mistakes, that he had hurt and been hurt, that he longed for the simplicity of his early life. The days before fame reshaped everything. In interviews, he spoke carefully, measured, always with grace. But inside, he often battled thoughts he never allowed to surface. Questions about whether he had lived fully, or simply lived through the roles the world handed him. Questions about what truly mattered, now that so much of his life was behind him. He spent years trying to figure out how to carry both sides of himself. The legend the world admired, and the man who still felt like the quiet boy from Mississippi, searching for a sense of belonging. But the price of greatness is not just paid through pain, it is paid through transformation. He learned that the cost of becoming iconic was losing parts of himself along the way. He learned that fame demands a piece of your heart that you never get back. He learned that grief follows you, even in success. He learned that age humbles you long before the world realizes it. And yet, through all of it, Morgan Freeman never lost the part of himself that mattered most. The strength that came from surviving a life far harder than the world ever knew. His resilience did not come from fame. It came from everything he endured before fame, everything he carried during fame, everything he lost because of fame. Now, at 88, he reflects not on the applause, but on the moments in between. The quiet afternoons, the long nights, the voices of people he loved and lost, the memories that made him smile and ache at the same time. The truth that success never protected him from life's sharpest edges. Fame gave him a crown, but it didn't shield him from heartbreak. It didn't save him from pain. It didn't stop the years from carving themselves into his soul. The price of becoming Morgan Freeman was learning to carry sorrow with dignity, to walk with memories that weighed heavily, and to keep moving forward, even when life tried to bring him to a standstill. And still, despite everything he paid, the world had not yet seen the moment when his life and his silence collapsed into a truth that would change him forever. Even legends are not immune to moments of collapse. Morgan Freeman, the man whose voice had become synonymous with wisdom, whose presence exuded authority, faced a fall the world would barely see coming. And yet, for him, it was inevitable. A collision of fame, age, and the hidden burdens he had carried for decades. The first cracks appeared subtly. Small mistakes, missed cues, moments of forgetfulness that he quietly blamed on fatigue rather than age. He noticed it during rehearsals. Lines that once flowed effortlessly now stumbled from his lips. The precise control he had over his tone, over his presence, over every gesture that audiences believed was innate, now required effort, concentration, focus that could be broken by a single distraction. The world, of course, could not see this. In public, he remained Morgan Freeman, the unshakable voice of reason, the man whose calm could steady a room. But in private, he confronted the truth he had long avoided. Time had begun to erode him. Not dramatically, but persistently, silently, and unforgivingly. The pressures of Hollywood, once familiar, became heavier. Roles that demanded energy or intensity required more than he could always give. Scripts that once excited him now felt daunting. Even travel, long shoots, and interviews became exhausting in ways that embarrassed him. To admit it would be to shatter the image the world had carefully constructed. The wise, eternal mentor, always present, always reliable. Then came the financial missteps, small errors, bad investments, mismanaged projects that were amplified by media scrutiny. Even a man of immense wealth and caution is not immune to mistakes, and the public is never forgiving when they are exposed. For Morgan, these were minor in scale compared to the wealth he had amassed. Yet they carried weight far beyond numbers. The humiliation, the questioning, the whispers of doubt. But the fall was not just practical. It was emotional. Loneliness, the kind that accompanies age and fame, intensified. Friends had drifted. Colleagues had moved on. Family members were often distant, absorbed in their own lives. And despite the reverence he inspired, he felt isolated, as if the crown he had worn so proudly had also separated him from the very people who might have understood him best. Then came public scrutiny. The world loves legends until they show signs of vulnerability. Rumors, tabloid stories, misinterpreted statements, they all chipped at him. The man who had spent decades projecting calm now had to navigate a flood of criticism for things he barely controlled. Each story, each headline, each misquote felt like a small erosion of the life he had built so painstakingly. And the greatest blow, perhaps the one that hurt the most, was the internal reckoning. Morgan Freeman began to see the consequences of his relentless dedication to work. The years he had spent carrying every burden alone, the sacrifices he had made, the moments he had missed, all accumulated into a heavy tide of regret. He realized that the balance he had maintained so carefully for decades had begun to tip, and with it came doubt, fear, and a confrontation with his own mortality. Health issues emerged, not sudden, dramatic, or fatal, but persistent, creeping, and insidious. Pain in joints, fatigue, minor but recurring ailments that served as constant reminders of age. Each ache, each stumble, each slower step reminded him that even the strongest cannot escape time. And while he bore these privately, the realization struck him profoundly. He was human, vulnerable, fragile. During this period, some of his roles were more difficult than before. On set, he found himself relying on younger colleagues to carry energy he once generated effortlessly. Lines had to be rehearsed multiple times. Scenes that previously required one take now demanded several. But he refused to give in to the perception of weakness. He masked every struggle behind a practiced calm. A smile, a voice that sounded steady even when the body and mind whispered otherwise. Relationships, too, bore the strain. Morgan felt the distance grow between himself and those he loved. He worried about the legacy he would leave behind, not in terms of films, awards, or recognition, but in the memory of how he treated those closest to him. The isolation of fame and the relentless pursuit of craft had created gaps he feared could never be mended. And yet, even as the fall unfolded, there was resilience. Even in the quietest, most private moments of despair, he refused to let himself fully succumb. He reflected, he meditated, he sought counsel quietly. But the recognition remained. Legends are not infallible, and even the most admired among us must face the fragility of life. This period of Morgan Freeman's life was not defined by scandal or dramatic loss, but by the slow, inexorable awareness of human limitations. It was a fall that few could see, but one he felt profoundly every day. A fall measured not in public failure, but in private reckonings, in moments of doubt, in the quiet ache of time's passage. And yet, in the midst of this fall, a quiet truth emerged. The very struggles that threatened to topple him also contained the seeds of his greatest transformation. For Morgan Freeman, the fall was not the end. It was a turning point, a time to confront what had been hidden, to reckon with the burdens of fame and age, and to prepare for a return not just as a legend, but as a man reconciled with his own humanity. The fall, though painful, was also instructive. It forced reflection, humility, and adaptation. It revealed the human beneath the icon, the man beneath the voice, the soul beneath the legend. And in this confrontation with fragility, Morgan Freeman began to understand that true strength does not reside in invulnerability, but in the courage to face what one cannot control. The world may never fully understand this phase of his life. They saw him as a constant presence, a voice of wisdom. But behind the scenes, the fall challenged every aspect of his being. Physically, emotionally, socially. And as he navigated these challenges, he began to prepare for what would come next. The silence, the retreat, the reflection, and eventually, the return that would redefine how the world saw him once more. Even in the darkest moments, the quiet boy who had once clung to stories to escape a harsh childhood now clung to his craft, to his purpose, and to the truth that life, in all its peaks and valleys, had shaped him for this very journey. After the fall came the silence, a silence that was both imposed and chosen. For Morgan Freeman, the world had grown louder, expectations heavier, and fame more demanding than ever. But in the quiet that followed, he discovered a place few had seen, a place where the legend receded and the man emerged. The silence was not emptiness, it was reflection. It was the space between the applause and the next line, the pause between public perception and private truth. It was a time when he could finally hear himself, without the weight of expectation pressing down, without cameras, without interviews, without the relentless gaze of an audience. In this silence, Morgan Freeman confronted the truths he had long avoided. He confronted age, the slow erosion of energy, the aches that reminded him of every year lived. The body that once moved effortlessly now reminded him daily of its limits. He confronted mortality, knowing that each sunrise carried with it the inescapable passage of time. And he confronted the choices he had made, the relationships he had sacrificed, the moments he had missed. Silence, for him, was also a kind of sanctuary. It was the space to grieve privately, to process losses quietly, and to reconcile the man he had become with the boy he once was. The world had celebrated him for decades, but it had never asked him how he felt beneath the calm exterior. And now, in the stillness, he could finally sit with those feelings. The silence revealed another truth. The isolation that had come with fame was not simply a byproduct of the industry, it was a reflection of his own self-protection. He had always been cautious about whom he let close, whom he trusted, and whom he allowed to see the depth of his vulnerabilities. Now, removed from the constant demands of public life, he saw how these walls had shaped him. He spent hours in thought, revisiting memories both painful and joyful. Childhood moments of struggle flashed before him. The fear of poverty, the uncertainty of constant moves, the early heartbreaks and tiny victories. He reflected on the spark that had first drawn him to acting, the breakthrough that had validated his talent, the crown that had elevated him to legend status, and he understood, in a clarity afforded only by distance, that each experience had been a thread in the tapestry of the man he had become. The silence also allowed him to confront grief. Losses that had been carried quietly now found space in which to exist fully. He remembered loved ones who had passed, friends who had drifted away, and the inevitability of time claiming moments he could never retrieve. These reflections were not easy. They were raw, often overwhelming, but they were necessary. Silence offered him the opportunity to honor those losses on his own terms. It was during this period that Morgan Freeman rediscovered his voice. Not the public, iconic voice that filled theaters and narrations, but the private, introspective voice that had been with him since childhood. He wrote, he meditated, and he reflected on the essence of life itself. What mattered, he realized, was not fame, wealth, or recognition. It was presence, integrity, and connection. The silence was transformative. It taught him patience in a new way, humility in a deeper way, and gratitude in a more profound way. He understood that life's true lessons often arrive quietly, without applause or acknowledgement. And he recognized that, although the world had built an image of him as unshakable, the strength he truly possessed came from the ability to face his vulnerabilities honestly. In this period, he also reconnected with the craft that had defined him. Not for fame, not for money, but for the love of storytelling itself. He chose projects that resonated deeply, roles that allowed him to explore human complexity, and narrations that reflected the truths he had come to understand. His work became less about recognition and more about authenticity, a reflection of a man who had finally learned to live for himself as much as for others. The silence was not without struggle. There were days when loneliness pressed heavily, when reflection became introspection bordering on doubt, when the memories of mistakes and losses seemed unbearable. But even in these moments, he found resilience. He found clarity. He found the quiet courage that had been cultivated over decades of survival, struggle, and perseverance. And within this silence, Morgan Freeman began to see a path forward. A path that did not require the trappings of fame or the constant validation of the public. A path defined by self-awareness, authenticity, and the quiet power of living in alignment with one's values. He understood that life beyond the spotlight, though quieter, offered depth, meaning, and connection that the noise of the world could never provide. The silence then became a foundation for renewal, It was not an absence, but a preparation, a gestation period for a return that would honor both the legend and the man. Morgan Freeman emerged from this silence more grounded, more compassionate, and more attuned to the truths of life that had long guided him, but had been overshadowed by fame and expectation. In the end, the silence was a teacher. It revealed the cost of the crown, the toll of the fall, and the enduring power of reflection. It showed that even a life lived in the spotlight must periodically retreat into quiet to regain perspective, to process pain, and to reclaim purpose. At 88, Morgan Freeman carries this silence with him, not as a burden, but as a source of strength. It is in the quiet that he has found himself again, that he has reconciled his past, and that he has prepared for the next chapter of his extraordinary life. The world may see only the voice, the presence, the legend, but the man behind the voice has been transformed, renewed, and ready to continue leaving a legacy that transcends fame itself. After the silence, after the private reckoning with age, loss, and the weight of decades spent under the world's gaze, Morgan Freeman began a subtle, deliberate return. This was not a return defined by spectacle or a sudden resurgence in fame. It was quieter, more introspective, a return to presence, purpose, and authenticity, rather than applause or validation. The return started with small choices. A role here, a narration there, a project that spoke to his heart rather than to his reputation. Slowly, deliberately, he began to reclaim his voice in a way that reflected the depth of his lived experience. The world saw the familiar Morgan Freeman, the voice that commands attention, the presence that fills the screen. But beneath the surface, a man tempered by hardship, reflection, and self-discovery had emerged. Morgan's choices became intentional. Every character he portrayed now carried layers of meaning, a reflection of the man he had become through trials and triumphs. Each role demanded truth over performance, substance over spectacle. He no longer acted to impress. He acted to connect, to speak to the human experience with honesty, empathy, and wisdom. His return also extended beyond acting. He sought projects that allowed him to give back, to nurture, and to guide. He became a mentor quietly, offering counsel to younger actors, lending his experience to projects that mattered. He used his voice in ways that influenced not only audiences, but the industry itself, advocating for authenticity, patience, and craft over mere glamour. The world noticed, but perhaps in a different way than before. There was no frenzy, no fanfare, no headline-grabbing resurgence. Instead, there was respect, a deeper appreciation for a man who had navigated fame, fortune, loss, and solitude with dignity. The admiration was quieter, but more enduring. It reflected a recognition not just of talent, but of the character required to sustain a life so publicly observed, yet privately complex. Morgan also embraced personal reconnections. Family, friends, colleagues who had drifted over the years, he made time to nurture these bonds, to mend what could be mended, and to accept what could not. The wisdom of age allowed him to approach relationships differently, with patience, understanding, and forgiveness. He realized that success is hollow without connection, and he sought to restore that equilibrium in his life. Part of the return was also accepting the limitations of his body and mind. He learned to adapt, to honor the physical realities of age, and to focus on roles and work that aligned with his capabilities. Where once he had pushed himself relentlessly, he now moved with intentionality, conserving energy for what truly mattered. This adaptation, though subtle, reflected a profound understanding. Greatness is not always about doing more, but about doing what is meaningful, with integrity. Through this return, Morgan Freeman reminded the world and himself that legacy is not solely defined by the volume of one's output, but by its depth, authenticity, and humanity. He became selective not out of ego, but out of discernment, seeking projects that would resonate, educate, and endure. The man who had once carried the weight of everyone's expectations now chose how to carry himself and what to share with the world. Publicly, his return was marked by performances that captivated audiences anew. Films and narrations reflected the depth of his inner journey, roles infused with quiet power, emotion, and truth. The voice that had once seemed omnipresent now conveyed not just authority, but experience, lived, earned, and refined over decades. Viewers sensed it instinctively, the resonance of a man who had faced struggle, loss, and reflection, and had emerged more human, more compassionate, more profound. Yet, the return was never about reclaiming the crown, it was about claiming himself. Every scene, every role, every narration became an extension of that journey, a way to translate personal experience into art that touched lives. In doing so, Morgan Freeman demonstrated that true resilience is not about avoiding the fall, but about the grace with which one rises, adapts, and continues forward. He also became a storyteller in new ways. Beyond film, beyond acting, he used his voice to elevate stories of the human condition, narrating documentaries, lending insight to works that explored history, humanity, and justice. These choices reflected not just talent, but intention, a desire to leave a mark that transcends entertainment and reaches into the hearts and minds of audiences worldwide. The return was deeply personal as well. Morgan spent more time reflecting on what mattered most: family, legacy, and the quieter joys of life. The public sees the actor, but the man behind the voice savors the moments between projects. A quiet morning, a conversation with a loved one, the satisfaction of a role well played. In this phase, the essence of life revealed itself not in accolades, but in presence, connection, and gratitude. By the time Morgan Freeman reached the later stages of his return, he had transformed adversity into wisdom, silence into insight, and struggle into strength. The world admired the return, the performances, the narrations, the public appearances, but he understood the deeper victory, the reconciliation of the man with the life he had lived. He had navigated fame, heartbreak, physical limitations, and solitude, and emerged not only intact, but enlightened. In many ways, the return was the culmination of a life's journey. It was proof that even after loss, fall, and silence, one can reclaim purpose, redefine self, and reconnect with the world meaningfully. The legend the public admires is remarkable, yes, but the man who endured, reflected, and returned is extraordinary. At 88, Morgan Freeman's return is a testament to resilience, wisdom, and the enduring human spirit. It is proof that even after decades of challenge, the capacity to rise, reconnect, and live fully remains. He is no longer simply the voice of authority or the figure of calm. He is a living chronicle of struggle, reflection, adaptation, and grace. And in this return, the stage is not just his workplace, it is a mirror reflecting the life he has lived, the battles he has faced, and the man he has become. The audience sees the performance, but he sees the journey. And in that quiet, private understanding, Morgan Freeman has found a peace and purpose that no fame or fortune alone could ever provide. Legacy is often spoken of in terms of fame, awards, and public recognition. But for Morgan Freeman, the true measure of legacy transcends accolades, transcends box office numbers, transcends the applause of millions. His legacy is woven into the moments where humanity is captured in its rawest form, the quiet, enduring truths he has brought to every role, every narration, every story he has touched. At 88, the magnitude of his contributions is not merely cinematic. It is cultural, philosophical, spiritual even. Morgan Freeman's voice has narrated the human condition, both literally and metaphorically, giving life to stories that explore morality, resilience, and the complexities of existence. He has become a vessel through which audiences understand themselves, their history, and their shared humanity. In this, his impact is immeasurable. His films, Driving Miss Daisy, The Shawshank Redemption, $1 Million Baby, among countless others, are remembered not simply for their narrative or performances, but for the authenticity he brought to them. He transformed every character into someone palpably real, someone who inhabits a life beyond the confines of a screenplay. The subtlety, the patience, the depth he infused into every role is what continues to inspire new generations of actors, directors, and storytellers. Yet legacy is not only about what is seen on screen. Morgan Freeman has become a symbol of perseverance, a living testament to the power of patience, resilience, and dedication. He endured a childhood of struggle, a life of doubt, and decades of labor before the world recognized his brilliance. That journey, the relentless pursuit of craft, in the face of uncertainty, is now as instructive as the films themselves. It serves as a roadmap for anyone seeking to navigate their own life with integrity and resolve. The influence he has wielded goes further. Through narration and voice work, he has become a bridge between generations. His calm, authoritative timbre has introduced young audiences to history, science, and human stories in ways that are both accessible and profoundly moving. Documentaries like March of the Penguins and educational projects across media platforms carry his voice into homes worldwide, shaping perspectives and inspiring curiosity. This is a legacy not measured in awards, but in minds touched, hearts moved, and understanding deepened. Morgan Freeman's legacy is also moral. He has consistently chosen roles and projects that challenge stereotypes, illuminate truth, and explore the human spirit. In an industry often driven by spectacle, he has opted for substance. His choices reflect a consciousness of impact, what stories are worth telling, and how they should be told. This ethical awareness elevates his career beyond performance into the realm of social and cultural significance. Beyond his public work, his personal legacy is quietly profound. Those who have worked alongside him speak of his generosity, mentorship, and humility. He is known for creating spaces where younger actors can learn without fear, where creativity is nurtured rather than demanded, and where the craft itself is honored. His influence in shaping the next generation of talent ensures that his principles and standards will persist long after he steps away from the screen. Legacy is also measured in the lessons left behind. Morgan Freeman's life exemplifies that true success is never instantaneous, and it is never guaranteed. It is earned through resilience, guided by patience, and defined by the ability to remain authentic in a world that often rewards pretense. His life story, rising from humble beginnings, overcoming adversity, enduring both triumph and heartbreak, is a blueprint for human endurance and grace under pressure. Even at 88, he continues to embody this legacy. He does not rest solely on past achievements. Instead, he chooses to engage thoughtfully, selectively, and meaningfully. Each role, each narration, each appearance reflects decades of accumulated wisdom, a mastery of craft, and a deep understanding of human emotion. He is no longer chasing success. He is curating a body of work that will stand as a testament to the full spectrum of human experience. Morgan Freeman's legacy also challenges the very notion of time. While age may limit the physical body, it cannot constrain influence. He has demonstrated that impact is cumulative, that the resonance of one's work continues to grow and evolve long after the moment it was created. The characters he has brought to life, the stories he has narrated, and the example he has set in life all continue to ripple outward, touching lives yet unseen, inspiring actions yet unimagined. Perhaps most poignantly, his legacy is deeply human. It is imperfect, vulnerable, and real. It includes the triumphs and failures, the joys and losses, the moments of doubt, and the moments of courage. It is not a sanitized history designed for public consumption. It is authentic, earned, and enduring. In this, he has taught the world that true greatness lies not in invulnerability, but in perseverance, honesty, and the courage to embrace life fully, in all its complexity. And so, at 88, Morgan Freeman's life beyond the spotlight may carry moments of heartbreak, struggle, and solitude. But it is precisely these elements that make his legacy profound. It is the combination of his talent, his resilience, and his humanity that ensures he will be remembered not just as an actor or a voice or a celebrity, but as a man who lived fully, reflected deeply, and shared generously with the world. In the end, Morgan Freeman's legacy is the gift of presence. He has shown that the measure of a life well lived is not just what is seen on the surface, but the depth of influence, the compassion extended, and the authenticity maintained. His story reminds us that while fame fades, wisdom endures, and while moments pass, the impact of a life lived with integrity and courage can resonate across generations. He leaves behind more than films, more than accolades, more than a recognizable voice. He leaves behind an enduring testament to what it means to rise, to fall, to reflect, and ultimately, to return. A legacy that will inspire not just artists, but anyone seeking meaning, connection, and the courage to face life honestly. Morgan Freeman's story is not just about fame or fortune, it is about humanity, about struggle, perseverance, and redemption, about the journey from humble beginnings to global recognition, and the quiet, dignified strength required to carry both. It is a legacy that transcends cinema and touches the soul. A reminder that even in the most public of lives, the deepest truths are lived quietly, often unseen, yet infinitely powerful. And as the world continues to watch, listen, and learn from him, Morgan Freeman's life, at 88 and beyond the spotlight, stands as a testament. Greatness is measured not in wealth or applause, but in the authenticity, resilience, and humanity one leaves behind. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to Talksberry and comment. Remember, greatness isn't in the spotlight, but in the struggle behind it.